I remember the exact words. They didn't echo, they just sank, like stones dropped into a well that had no bottom. "You're dead to me, Dad." He said it standing in the doorway of his mother's house, his house now, technically, his voice steady in a way that scared me more than any shout ever could. He didn't tremble, he didn't cry. He just looked at me as if I was a stranger who'd wandered too close. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a breath that smelled like last night's whiskey and this morning's shame. He closed the door, and that was it. No goodbye, no curse, just silence. There's a kind of quiet that follows a moment like that. It isn't peaceful, it's hollow, like someone turned down the volume on the world and all that's left is the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you you're still here, for better or worse. I sat on the steps for a while, staring at the crack in the porch what I once helped build. When he was 6, he spilled a whole can of blue paint right there. We laughed about it for hours. That blue stain was still there that day, just lighter, faded like the memory itself. I don't remember driving home, but I do remember the ache in my chest and the whisper that followed me like a ghost. "You're dead to me, Dad." The thing about ghosts, they never leave when you tell them to. I wasn't always this version of myself. There was a time I was the dad who showed up to baseball practice, who fixed the brakes on his bike, who kissed the top of his head goodnight. I worked at a small auto shop off Route 12. Grease under my nails, calluses on my palms, but I was proud because everything I did was for him and for her. Then the accident happened. One red light, one drunk driver, and suddenly my wife was gone. And with her, man, I used to be. They tell you grief has stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. What they don't tell you is that sometimes you get stuck between the anger and the bottle, and that place can last years. It started small, a drink after work, then 2. Then the nights got longer and the excuses got easier. "I'm just tired. I'll stop tomorrow." But tomorrow became next week, and next week became a lie. My son would hide the bottles. Once he poured them down the sink. I yelled at him, yelled like he'd stolen from me. In truth, he was trying to save me, and I repaid him with words sharp enough to cut through bone. You can only say "I'm sorry" so many times before it stops meaning anything. Eventually, he stopped listening. And then he stopped calling. The last time we were in the same room before that day at the door, he was packing a suitcase. I remember the way his hands shook, not from fear but from restraint. He didn't want to say what he was thinking. I could see it in his eyes. "Though you're not my father anymore." I wanted to reach out, but I didn't, because shame has a funny way of turning your arms to lead. You sit there, weighted down by everything you could have done differently, and by the time you realize it, they are already gone. Years passed. I tried to sober up more times than I can count. Each time I'd make it a few days, then fall again. There's no sound lonelier than a bottle cap twisting open in an empty room. On the day he told me I was dead to him, I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was dead, not buried in the ground, but buried under every mistake I'd ever made. That night I drove to the old garage. It had closed down years ago. The "for lease" sign flapped in the wind like a flag for the fallen. I parked out front, turned off the engine, and just sat there, staring at the ghost of my old life. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for a drink. I just sat there and let the silence tell me the truth. I wasn't dead, not yet, but I was close, and the only thing left alive in me was regret. I remember whispering to the empty seat beside me as if my boy were there. "Give me one more chance, son, just one." The air didn't answer, but somewhere deep down a small voice did, and it said, "Then start acting like you deserve it." That was the night something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no lightning bolt from heaven, just a quiet decision. I want to be the man my son can forgive even if he never does. And for the first time in a long time, I drove home sober. The road was empty, the sky just starting to lighten. I rolled down the window and felt the cold air on my face. It stung, but in the best way, because it meant I was still here, still breathing, still capable of change. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long while, watching the sunrise through the dirty windshield. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real, and sometimes that's enough to begin again. I whispered to the morning light, "I may be dead to him today, but I'm not done yet." There's a moment just before your life begins to fall apart when everything still looks ordinary. You don't notice it then, the way light hits the kitchen counter, or the way her laughter fills the house, but later, those are the things that haunt you. because they were the last quiet signs that you still had something worth losing. Back then, mornings smelled like coffee and motor oil. I'd leave early for the shop, lunch pail in one hand, thermos in the other. She'd wave from the porch, hair tied up, that same old robe she refused to throw away. Our boy would run after the truck, barefoot, yelling, "Bring home donuts." Sometimes I did, sometimes I forgot. But either way, he'd greet me with the same smile. I didn't know that kind of loyalty was fragile, that even the strongest bond can snap if you keep pulling the wrong way. The accident didn't come out of nowhere. It came on a Saturday, the kind that started warm and careless. We had plans to visit her sister. She drove ahead with our son while I stayed back to finish a brake job for a regular customer. When the phone rang an hour later, I thought it was her, teasing me for being late again. But it wasn't. It was a voice that trembled, and then came the sound that never leaves you, a siren crying through the receiver. By the time I reached the hospital, it was already over. A drunk driver, a wet road, that's all it took. People talk about heartbreak like it's one moment, one clean break. But it isn't. It's a slow unthreading. Every drawer you open, every jacket you smell, every plate left on the table, they all pull at you until you unravel. For months, I moved through the house like a man underwater. Our boy tried to fill the silence. He'd ask if I wanted to go fishing or fix the old bike in the shed. I said I was tired. What I meant was I don't know how to live without her. The first drink came on a Sunday night. The house was too quiet, the air too clean. I found a half bottle of bourbon in the back of the cupboard, a gift from someone, long unopened. The glass burned my throat, but it dulled everything else. The sharp edges of grief softened for a few hours, and I mistook that for peace. I went to work the next day like nothing happened. I smiled, made jokes, turned the wrench, and nodded at customers. But the world had lost its color. Even the smell of grease and steel, once comforting, now felt like a reminder that life goes on without asking if you're ready. Nights grew longer. I'd sit on the porch with the bottle beside me, staring at the empty chair where she used to read. Sometimes I'd hear her voice, not words, just the rhythm of her breathing. That's when I started leaving the TV on all night, just to drown it out. Our son learned quickly what silence meant in that house. He tiptoed around me, careful not to say the wrong thing. He was 12, old enough to understand loss, but too young to carry mine. There was one night, late autumn, the kind where the wind scrapes against the siding. He came into the living room with his mother's old photo album. He sat beside me and opened it. "Do you remember this?" he asked, pointing at a picture of the three of us at the lake. I nodded, eyes fixed on the bottle instead of him. He waited, hoping I'd say more. I didn't, so he closed the book quietly and went to bed. The sound of that cover shutting, that soft click, it was the sound of distance beginning. Work started to slip. I'd show up late, hands shaking, eyes red. One afternoon, I forgot to tighten a bolt on a customer's car. Could have killed someone. That was the day my boss pulled me aside and said, "You need time, man, go get help." But I didn't want help, I wanted numbness. Bills piled up. Letters went unopened. The mortgage, the utilities, the sympathy cards, all stacked in the same corner, collecting dust. I stopped answering the phone. Even friends gave up after a while. Grief has a smell, and after enough time, people can sense it on you. They keep their distance. One night, I woke up on the couch to the sound of rain, heavy, relentless. The front door was open, wind blowing the curtains sideways. I stumbled outside barefoot, the ground cold and slick. Across the street through the haze, I saw a small figure standing in the rain, my son holding a backpack. He'd been waiting for the bus, except it was midnight. He looked at me with those same steady eyes I'd see again years later, the night he told me I was dead to him. He said softly, "I can't sleep here anymore." And just like that, he turned and went back inside, not crying, not angry, just done. I stood there for a long time, rain soaking through my shirt, wondering when exactly I'd crossed the line between mourning and destruction. Maybe it was that night, maybe earlier, maybe it didn't matter, because once you fall far enough, even time stops keeping count. The next morning, I called my brother, Ray, and asked him to take him for a while. I told myself it was for his own good, that he needed a stable place. But the truth was simpler and crueler. I didn't want him to see what I was becoming. When the house finally emptied, the silence came back, heavier than ever. It smelled of rain and old bourbon, the kind of smell that settles into the walls and never leaves. That was the start of my fall, not a single crash, but a slow, quiet descent. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being a father. I just didn't realize it until the day he told me so. It was winter when the house finally gave up on pretending to be a home. The air inside always smelled faintly of damp wood and old laundry. The furnace rattled like it was gasping for air. Outside, the sky hung low, heavy with snow that refused to fall, the kind of gray that makes everything look like it's been drained of warmth. I woke up that morning to the sound of the front door closing. My son was already dressed for school. His backpack was zipped tight. He didn't look at me, just tied his boots and stood there waiting. "Eat something," I said, voice rough from another sleepless night. He didn't answer, just pulled his hat down over his ears and left. The silence that followed had a weight to it, like the whole house had exhaled and decided it was done holding its breath for me. I found a note later, slipped under the salt shaker on the kitchen table. In his handwriting, small, careful letters, it said, "Mom would be sad if she saw you like this." That was all. The paper was cold to the touch, as if the words themselves didn't want to be here anymore. That day I didn't go to work. I didn't even open the blinds. I just sat at the kitchen table, the note still in front of me, a coffee mug growing stale by the minute. The smell of it turned bitter. Everything did. By noon I could feel the familiar pulse behind my eyes, the craving, the hollow ache in the chest that says, just one drink, just enough to breathe again. And maybe, if I'm honest, I wanted to forget that note existed. Forget that boy's face when he left. I found the bottle behind the cereal box, half full. I didn't bother with a glass. It burned its way down, but this time it didn't numb anything. It only made the edges sharper. The sound of glass against the table was louder than I meant it to be. It echoed. And somewhere down the hall, a frame fell from the wall, that photo of us at the lake. The one where she's holding him in her arms, sunlight on their faces. The frame cracked across the middle. Her smile split in two. Something in me snapped right then. I grabbed the photo, the broken glass biting into my palm, and shouted. I don't even know what words came out. Just noise. Just years of guilt and grief and rot bursting loose all at once. I threw it at the wall, watched it shatter, watched the tiny fragments glitter against the floorboards like pieces of something I'd never get back. That's when I heard him. He must have come home early, school canceled maybe. He was standing in the door, frozen, his breath visible in the cold. He saw my hand bleeding, the bottle on the counter, the picture on the floor. He didn't say a word, but I saw the look in his eyes, that mix of fear and understanding that no child should ever have. "Go to your room," I said. He didn't move. "Go," I repeated louder. My voice cracked on the word. He flinched. Not because he was afraid I'd hit him, because he was realizing that the man in front of him wasn't his father anymore. That night he packed a bag. I didn't see him do it, I only heard the zipper. A small final sound, like a door closing in slow motion. He came into the living room. I was sitting in the recliner, staring at the muted TV. He stood there for a moment like he was waiting for me to stop him. I didn't. "My Uncle Ray said I can stay with him for a while," he said quietly. His voice shook a little, but his eyes didn't. They were steady, older somehow. I opened my mouth to speak, to say I'd get better, that I'd try again, that I loved him, but the words caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. What came out was a sigh, tired and useless. He took it as an answer. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "I'll come back when you're ready to be my dad again," he said. Then he was gone. The sound of the door closing was soft, almost polite, but it was final, like a heartbeat giving up. I don't remember how long I sat there after that. The house felt larger than it had ever been. Every sound, the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, felt like an accusation. I looked down at my hand. The blood had dried into a thin crust along the cuts, the color of rust. Somewhere under the chair, a shard of glass caught the lamplight, reflecting a sliver of her smile. I couldn't look at it anymore. I gathered the photo pieces into an envelope. I told myself I'd fix it one day, once I could steady my hands again, but I never did. That envelope stayed in the drawer for years, a quiet tomb for the man I used to be. Outside, the snow finally started to fall. It came down heavy, thick, erasing footprints, blurring everything. Through the window, I watched the world turn white, clean, untouched, indifferent. For a moment, I imagined him walking somewhere far away under that same snowfall, his small shoulders pulled tight against the cold. And I wondered if he looked back, even once. I hope he didn't, because that was the day he lost his father, and the day I lost everything else. I used to think rock bottom had a sound, a crash maybe, a door slamming shut, but when it finally came for me it was silent, just the slow hum of an engine dying in the cold. The house was gone first. They said the word foreclosure like it was something ordinary, a formality. But when they changed the locks, I felt the weight of that click deep inside my chest. It wasn't just a door closing. It was the world deciding it had no room for me. I packed what I could fit into the backseat of my old pickup, a few shirts, a blanket, a box of tools I hadn't touched in years, and the envelope, the one with the broken photo of us inside. I didn't know why I took it. Maybe because it was proof I'd once belonged somewhere. The first few nights I parked near the edge of town, by a half-abandoned strip mall where the neon signs still flickered but no one went inside. I slept sitting up, head against the window, the smell of old upholstery filling my nose. When the wind picked up, the truck rocked gently, almost like someone trying to lull me to sleep. It would have been comforting if it didn't feel so empty. Mornings came too soon. The air was sharp enough to sting when I breathed. I'd start the engine just to feel the heater blow weak air through the vents. It always took a while before the frost melted off the inside of the windshield, like even the glass didn't want to face the day. I tried to keep a routine. It gave me something to hold on to. Gas station bathroom, cold water, paper towels for a shave. Sometimes I'd talk to the guy at the counter pretending I still had somewhere to be. He never asked questions. Maybe he knew better. On good days, I found work at a scrapyard outside town, cash only, nothing official. The smell there was a mix of burnt metal and diesel, heavy enough to coat your tongue. I didn't mind it. It reminded me that I could still do something even if the world had stopped expecting it from me. At night, I'd drive to the industrial park near the river. It was quiet there. Sometimes you could hear the low whistle of freight trains passing in the distance. The sound cut through the dark like a heartbeat, steady, indifferent, alive. I'd sit and listen, wondering where those trains were headed, and if anyone on them ever thought about the people they'd left behind. There were others like me. You start to notice them when you live on the edge long enough. The man pushing a cart full of bottles, the woman who always hums under her breath at the bus stop, the old vet who talks to no one but the pigeons. We never really spoke, but we knew each other by sight. A nod here, a small gesture of recognition, a silent agreement we're still here. One night I parked behind a diner off Route 9. The place smelled like fried onions and coffee that had been sitting too long. Through the window I could see families eating, couples laughing, people moving through their small, ordinary lives. I used to be one of them. Now the glass between us felt thicker than any wall. The waitress noticed me. She came out with a paper bag and a coffee cup. Didn't say much, just handed them over and smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't fix anything but makes the night a little less cold. Inside the bag was a slice of pie, cherry. My wife used to make it every Thanksgiving. I couldn't eat it right away. I just held it in my lap, staring at the red filling seeping through the crust like it was bleeding. When I finally took a bite, it was cold and too sweet. But it brought something back, a memory of laughter in a kitchen that no longer existed, a voice I'd give anything to hear again. I sat there for a long time, chewing slowly, until the taste turned into salt. Days blurred after that. The body adapts to being unseen. You learn to move quietly to take up less space. You stop expecting people to look you in the eye. And when they do, it startles you, like catching your reflection after you've forgotten what you look like. One morning, I caught sight of myself in a store window. The man staring back had a beard streaked with gray, eyes rimmed red, clothes stiff from too many cold nights. I didn't recognize him, not completely, but there was something still flickering behind those eyes, something stubborn, something that refused to go out even when everything else had. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope, opened it carefully, though I'd done it 100 times before. The photo inside was still cracked, the same as the day I broke it. But the faces, her face, his face, hadn't faded. They stared back at me, alive in a way I wasn't anymore. That night, as I lay in the truck, the temperature dropped below freezing. The air burned when I inhaled. My hands ached, my breath clouded the darkness. I closed my eyes and thought about the last words my son said before he left. "I'll come back when you're ready to be my dad again." For the first time, I let myself wonder what ready would even look like. It wasn't warmth or money or a house. It was something smaller, something truer. The kind of strength that doesn't come from holding on but from finally being willing to start over. I fell asleep with that thought tucked against my chest, the photo still inside the envelope, and though the truck creaked and the world kept moving without me, for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a pause, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of an answer. It happened on a Tuesday. Not the kind of day anyone remembers, gray sky, wind pushing dead leaves across the pavement, the kind of cold that settles in your bones and stays there. I hadn't slept much. The heater in the truck had died 2 nights earlier and my breath came out in short white bursts that fogged the glass. I could feel the weight of every mile I'd driven with nowhere to go. I'd been clean for maybe a week, or maybe not. I'd stopped keeping track. There's a certain point when days blur into each other, hunger, cold, silence, and you start to forget the difference between surviving and just not dying. That morning I woke up with a pain in my chest so sharp I thought it was the end. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. It was quieter, like my body had finally grown tired of carrying me. I tried to sit up, but the world tilted sideways. The empty coffee cup on the dashboard rolled off and hit the floor. I remember the sound, hollow, final. That's when I realized I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I reached for the glove compartment, pulled out the envelope, not because I wanted to look at it, just because it was the only thing left that felt like proof I still mattered somewhere once. The edges were soft now, worn from too many nights of being held too tight. I stared at their faces, her smile, his eyes, both of them frozen in a time before everything went wrong. For a moment, I could almost hear their laughter, that light, overlapping sound that used to fill the kitchen on Saturday mornings. And then it was gone, replaced by the hiss of the wind through the cracked window. I don't remember when the crying started. Maybe it had been there for years, buried under the weight of pride and whiskey and silence, but it came then, hard and ugly. It shook my chest, burned my throat, made my hands tremble. All the noise I'd kept inside finally found its way out. And in the middle of it, somewhere between a sob and a breath, I said it out loud. God, I don't want to die like this. The words hung there, small but sharp, like glass in the cold air. And for the first time, I didn't just say them, I meant them. I don't know if what happened next was grace or just luck. But in that quiet, I heard something, not a voice exactly, more like a thought that didn't belong to me. It said, then live differently, just that. No promise, no miracle, just a choice. I sat there for a long time, letting the idea sink in. Live differently. It sounded impossible and simple all at once. When I opened the door, the wind hit me hard, sharp, metallic, carrying the smell of snow from the hills. It felt clean somehow, like the world was reminding me it still existed even if I'd stopped noticing. My legs ached as I walked. My hands were raw, cracked from the cold. I found a payphone near the old gas station, one of the few still standing. I hadn't used one in years. The receiver smelled like rust and cigarettes. I slid in a few coins and dialed the only number I still remembered, the rehab center a guy at the scrapyard once mentioned. It rang twice. A woman's voice answered, calm and warm. She asked my name. I hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked. When I told her I didn't have insurance, she said, "We'll figure something out, just get here." There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling on her desk, a clock ticking faintly in the background. And then she said, "You can come in tonight if you need to." That word tonight felt like someone opening a door in a room I thought was sealed shut. It took me nearly an hour to find the place. An old church on the edge of town, converted into a shelter. The parking lot was half ice, half gravel. I walked up to the door, each step heavier than the last. Part of me wanted to turn around, to vanish back into the quiet that didn't ask anything of me. But I didn't. Inside, it smelled of disinfectant and something warm, soup maybe. There were voices down the hall, low and steady, the kind that sound like routine. A man at the front desk looked up. He was older, gray beard, soft eyes. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a clipboard and said, "Start with your first name." My hand shook as I wrote it. The letters came out uneven, like they were learning how to exist again. When I finished, he took the paper and said, "You're safe now. Let's get you something to eat." Safe. I hadn't heard that word in a long time. Didn't even know what it meant anymore. But hearing it, even from a stranger, felt like air filling a room that had been sealed too long. That night, I lay on a cot in a room full of quiet breathing. The walls were chipped, the lights dim, but the heat worked. I could feel it on my face, steady and soft. Someone down the hall was humming a tune, low, familiar, maybe a hymn. It reminded me of my wife's voice when she used to sing while doing dishes. I turned toward the wall and let my eyes close. The exhaustion came heavy, but behind it was something else, not quite peace, not yet, but the outline of it, like the first shape you see before dawn. Before I fell asleep, I whispered the same words again. But this time they sounded different, not a plea, not a confession, a promise. I don't want to die like this, and I won't. The first night without a drink is the loudest. You hear everything, your heartbeat, the hum of the lights, the whispers of people shifting in their beds, but the loudest sound of all is inside your head. It doesn't yell, it begs. Just one sip, it says, just to take the edge off. At the rehab center, nights stretched long. The windows rattled when the wind moved through the cracks. I lay on my cot, staring at the ceiling, tracing invisible shapes across the peeling paint. Every inch of my body ached, my hands, my back, my teeth. The kind of pain that feels like your bones remember what you've done to them. The counselor said the first 72 hours were the worst. They were right. Sweat came in waves. My stomach turned on itself. My skin itched like something was trying to crawl out. There were moments I swore the room tilted sideways, walls breathing, corners pulsing. Withdrawal isn't dramatic like the movies, it's quieter, more personal. It's your own body turning against you, demanding the poison it's grown to love. The volunteers kept checking in. A young nurse with tired eyes handed me water every hour. She said, "It'll get better. You just have to let it hurt first." I didn't have the strength to answer. I just nodded, gripping the cup until my fingers cramped. On the third day, I finally stood up without the room spinning. It felt like victory and humiliation all at once, because there I was, a grown man celebrating the act of standing. They had a schedule for everything. Wake-up bell at 6, breakfast at 7, group meeting at 9. The structure felt foreign at first. I hadn't lived by a clock since I lost my job, but there was something steady in it, a rhythm that didn't depend on me. For the first time in years, I let time carry me instead of chasing it. The mornings were hardest. The smell of coffee filled the small dining hall. It was strong, almost burnt, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes. Everyone sat close together, metal chairs scraping tile. Some prayed before eating, heads bowed low. Others stared into their bowls, lost in the fog of memory. Each of us had a story, but no one asked to hear it yet. That came later in the circle. The first time I spoke, my voice cracked. There were 10 of us sitting in folding chairs under a buzzing light. A man named Carl, an ex-firefighter, led the session. He had hands like cinder blocks and a voice that sounded like gravel soaked in whiskey. He said, "We start with truth. You can't rebuild anything without it." Then he looked at me. "Go ahead, first-timer." I wanted to disappear, but something about his eyes, calm, steady, wouldn't let me. So I started talking about my wife, the accident, my son, the bottle. The words came out uneven, heavy, but once they started, they didn't stop. By the end, my hands were shaking. No one interrupted. No one pitied me. When I finished, Carl just nodded and said, "You're not alone anymore." That line hit deeper than I expected. You're not alone anymore. It's strange how foreign belonging feels when you haven't known it in years. The days turned into weeks. They made us write, not stories, just confessions on paper, lists of apologies we'd never sent. I wrote my son's name over and over until the pen cut through the page. Sometimes I'd picture him as a child again, running down the driveway barefoot, shouting for me to hurry up. That memory kept me anchored when everything else in me wanted to quit. One afternoon, Carl asked if I'd help in the workshop, fixing old donated bicycles for kids in the neighborhood. The place smelled like chain grease and paint thinner. I hadn't touched a wrench in years. The first time I tightened a bolt and heard that clean metallic click, something inside me loosened. It was small, but it was purpose, the first I'd felt since everything fell apart. At night, the center grew quiet again. The hum of fluorescent lights gave way to soft snores and distant city sounds. Sometimes I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, hands clenched around nothing. But instead of reaching for a bottle, I'd reach for the photo in my jacket pocket. I'd unfold it carefully, fingers tracing the cracks like prayer beads. Her smile, his eyes, they didn't fade with time, they waited. And that thought that maybe they were still out there somewhere, waiting for me to get it right, it was enough to keep me from slipping. After a month, the counselor asked what I wanted to do next. The question startled me. For years, no one had asked what I wanted. I said, I just want to be someone my son can meet without flinching. She smiled, wrote something down on her clipboard and said, then start there. So I did. Each day after that became a quiet battle between who I'd been and who I was trying to become. Some mornings I won, some nights I didn't. But with every sunrise, the fight felt less like punishment and more like rebuilding. There was one evening late in the program, when Carl walked past me on his way out. He paused, hand on the door, and said, "You've still got a long road ahead, but hell, man, you're walking it." And for the first time in years, I realized he was right. I was walking again, not away from something, but toward it. 5 years. It sounds like a lifetime when you're counting from the outside. But when you're the one living it, sobriety isn't a single moment of triumph. It's 1,000 quiet choices that no one sees. Every morning, every night, every time you walk past a liquor aisle and don't turn your head. I mark the years the same way other people mark birthdays. One candle for each year, stuck into whatever dessert they served at the meeting, brownies, cupcakes, sometimes just a muffin with wax dripping down the side. The others would clap and I'd smile, but deep down I knew, a clean life doesn't erase the wreckage behind it. It just means you stopped adding to the fire. After rehab, I stayed on at the shelter for a while, helped fix things, drove people to meetings. Eventually, I rented a small apartment above a hardware store. The walls were thin enough to hear the traffic, but that sound, steady, anonymous, reminded me I was still part of the world. I liked that. Work came slow. No one rushes to hire a man with a record of drinking and disappearing. But the owner of a small garage on the east side took a chance on me. He'd been through it too, told me his own story on my first day, matter-of-factly, like sharing the weather. "Keep your head down, do your work, stay honest," he said. "The rest will sort itself out." He was right, mostly. I filled my days with routine, wrench, wipe, repeat. The smell of motor oil stuck to my skin again, but this time it felt like redemption, not decay. There was peace in knowing exactly what each tool did, in watching something broken run again under my hands. But nights were the hardest. That's when the quiet returned. I'd make tea instead of whiskey, sit by the window and think about him. My boy. By now he'd be in college, maybe out on his own. I pictured him older, taller, stronger, his mother's kindness still somewhere in his eyes. But I had no proof, no photos, no calls, only what my mind built from memory. I wrote to him once a month, never expecting an answer. Letters sealed and unmailed at first, then eventually sent. Simple words, updates. Still clean, still working. I hope you're doing all right. The kind of sentences that sound like small talk but are really prayers. None came back, not one. At first I told myself it was the mail. The address might have changed. But the truth was simpler and heavier. He didn't want to hear from me. And maybe he shouldn't have to. Still, I kept writing. Because sometimes the act of reaching out is the only thing that keeps your hands from closing into fists. On my 5th anniversary, the garage threw a small celebration. Nothing big, coffee, donuts, a few kind words. When they sang "Congratulations, man," I laughed and tried to mean it. But afterward, I drove to the church basement where it all began. Same folding chairs, same coffee pot that looked older than forgiveness itself. Carl was still leading the meetings. He'd gotten grayer, slower, but his eyes hadn't changed. When he saw me, he smiled, that same half-grin. "Well, look who's still kicking," he said. I sat down beside him. We didn't talk much, just listened to the newcomers share. Their voices trembled the way mine once did. After the meeting, he patted my shoulder. "You ever make peace with your boy?" The question hit harder than I expected. I shook my head. He nodded like he already knew. Then he said, "You can stay clean your whole life, but some folks still remember the mess. That's their right. Your job's just to stay ready when they stop being angry." That night those words echoed in my head long after I got home. Stay ready when they stop being angry. It was both hope and sentence, a kind of waiting that didn't have an end date. One Saturday, I drove past his old high school. The field lights were on, some kind of game. The sound of the crowd carried into the street, laughter and cheers cutting through the dusk. I parked down the block and watched for a while. Teenagers running across the field, parents shouting names from the bleachers. For a second, it felt like stepping back into a life that used to be mine. Then I saw him. Older, broader, wearing a coach's jacket with his name stitched on the sleeve. He was standing near the fence, whistle around his neck, clipboard in hand. Alive, whole, and so painfully familiar it stole my breath. I didn't get out of the car, didn't wave, didn't call his name. I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the man he'd become. When he laughed, it sounded like his mother. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe, just maybe, he'd turned out all right without me. When the game ended, he shook hands with his team, smiled at the parents, and walked toward the parking lot. He passed right in front of me without looking. Didn't recognize me, or maybe he did and chose not to. Either way, it was the same. As his car pulled away, I caught my reflection in the side mirror, older, worn, but steady, and something strange happened. I didn't crumble, I didn't drink, I didn't even cry. I just whispered, "Keep going, kid," and let the moment pass. The road home was dark, lined with streetlights that blinked in and out like old memories. Each one flickered for a second, then vanished behind me. But for the first time, the darkness didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space, a quiet place to keep walking, until forgiveness, if it ever came, knew where to find me. The letter began on a rainy Sunday. The kind of rain that blurs everything: streets, windows, even memories. I just finished cleaning the kitchen, the smell of lemon soap still hanging in the air, when I sat down at the table and stared at a blank sheet of paper. I hadn't planned to write that day, but something about the stillness, the soft tapping of rain on the roof, the sound of tires hissing down the wet street made the silence too loud to bear. So I reached for a pen and wrote his name at the top, just his first name. I couldn't bring myself to write son. For a while, nothing came. My hand hovered above the page like it was waiting for permission. Then, without really deciding to, I started. "I don't expect you to forgive me." That was the first line. I paused, listening to the clock tick across the room. The sound was steady, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I didn't, but I kept going. "I don't even know if you'll read this or if I'll ever send it. But if you do, I want you to know that I've spent every day of the last 5 years trying to be the kind of man who deserved to be your father in the first place." The words came slowly, unevenly, like walking across ice. I told him about the garage, about fixing things again, about the way the smell of oil and steel made me feel useful. I told him about the meetings, the small victories, the nights I almost slipped but didn't. And then I told him about the nights I wished I could call him, not to apologize again, but just to ask how his day had gone. I stopped for a moment, wiped the corner of my eye with the back of my hand, and kept writing. "I don't know what kind of man you've become, but I hope you laugh easily. I hope you're kind, even when life isn't. I hope you've learned to forgive yourself faster than I ever did." Outside, the rain grew heavier, turning the streetlights into halos. The apartment smelled of damp air and coffee gone cold. Somewhere downstairs, a radio played faint country music, static and sorrow in equal measure. The world felt far away, but the page in front of me felt close, alive, breathing with every word I put down. I wrote for hours, pausing only when my hand cramped. The letter grew long, too long maybe. I told him about the day I saw him coaching that team, how proud I was, how I stayed in the car because I didn't want to ruin it by being there, how his laughter had sounded like forgiveness even if it wasn't meant for me. "You looked happy," I wrote. "That's all I ever wanted for you. I wish I could have given it to you sooner." Then I stopped again. The pen hovered. There was one thing left, the thing I'd never been able to say out loud. So I took a breath and wrote it, slow and careful. "I love you, son. I always did. I just didn't know how to show it until it was too late." I set the pen down. My hand was trembling. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and quiet. I folded the paper once, then again, sliding it into an envelope. I didn't seal it. Not yet. That night I sat by the window, the street lamps casting a soft orange glow through the glass. I turned the envelope over in my hands again and again. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than words, like it held a version of me I wasn't sure I was ready to send out into the world. I thought about mailing it. I even looked up his address again, the same one I'd used for the other letters that never came back. But something in me hesitated. Not out of fear this time, out of understanding. Forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn quietly by living differently when no one's watching. And maybe the letter wasn't meant to reach him yet. Maybe it was meant to stay here with me until I was ready to let it go. I placed it in the top drawer of my desk, beneath a stack of bills and a small tin that held my sobriety chips. 5 coins, each one a different color, each one harder earned than the last. I ran my thumb over the smooth edges of the latest one, the fifth-year medallion, and thought about the life I was still building, one day at a time. When I closed the drawer, I felt a strange sense of calm, not peace exactly, but something close enough to keep me breathing. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds, weak but insistent. The air smelled of dust and new beginnings. I made coffee, sat at the same table, and watched the light move across the surface of the envelope through the thin wood. I could almost see the outline of the folded paper inside. For a moment, I imagined him finding it years from now, maybe after I was gone, and opening it, reading the words slowly, hearing my voice in them, maybe understanding that love doesn't always arrive when it should, but it still counts when it finally does. I didn't mail the letter that day. I didn't mail it ever, but I kept it close, a quiet promise, folded and waiting, and somehow knowing it existed was enough, because even if my son never read it, I had finally written the truth. And sometimes that's the first step toward being forgiven, even if no one ever says the words out loud. It was late, too late for anyone decent to call. The kind of hour when the world forgets you exist and the only sound left is the hum of your own breathing. The rain had just started again, soft against the window, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. The envelope, that letter I never sent, sat half buried under a stack of receipts. When the phone rang, I thought it was a wrong number. No one called me anymore, not at that hour, not ever really. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then I picked it up. "Hello," my voice came out rough, like it had to push through years of silence to find its way out. For a moment all I heard was breathing. Then a voice, steady, careful, older than I remembered but still somehow familiar. "Dad." The word hit me harder than any drink ever had. I didn't answer right away. Couldn't. I just sat there gripping the phone, the sound of that one word echoing through everything I'd built to survive, not hearing it. He cleared his throat. "It's me. I wasn't sure if this number still worked." I swallowed hard, searching for my voice. "It works," I said. My hand was shaking. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "I didn't think you'd ever." "I know." He interrupted softly. "I wasn't planning to." The air between us hummed, thin and electric, like the space before lightning. I could hear him breathing, could hear the faint sound of traffic behind him, the distant wail of a siren. Somewhere far away, my son, the boy I lost, the man he'd become, was standing under the same night sky, holding the same silence. He spoke again, quieter this time. "My wife's pregnant." The words hung there, simple and enormous. "I thought you should know," he added. "She wants the baby to know both sides of the family." For a second I couldn't breathe, not because of shock, but because of the way hope crept in, uninvited, fragile and real. A life I'd never met was already tied to mine by blood and grace. "I'm happy for you," I managed to say. "And I was. God, I was." He hesitated. "She doesn't know much about before. I told her bits and pieces, but—" He paused, choosing the next words like they mattered. "I told her you got clean." The lump in my throat grew heavy. I turned toward the window, the reflection of the rain-streaked streetlight warping my face. "I did," I said quietly. "5 years now." "I know," he replied. I saw you once at the game." The world seemed to tilt. He had seen me. He wasn't pretending that night hadn't happened. "You looked good," he said after a moment. "Older but steady." I laughed once, soft, broken. "That's about right." Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't sharp this time. It felt more like waiting, like the pause between two people standing at opposite sides of a bridge, wondering if it can still hold. "Finally," he said, "she wants to have dinner sometime, my wife, with you." It took me a second to realize what he was offering. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an opening, a small, trembling step toward something that could grow. I leaned back in the chair, pressing the phone tighter to my ear as if that could make him stay a little longer. "I'd like that," I said. "Whenever you're ready." He exhaled, a long, uncertain breath. "I don't know when that'll be," he said, "but I'll call again." "That's all I need," I said, and it was. There was a faint sound, like he almost said something else, then the line clicked. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, low and steady. I kept the phone pressed to my ear long after, afraid that hanging up would break the spell. The apartment was still. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new again, that clean, metallic scent that comes after a storm. I stood, set the phone down, and reached for the drawer where the letter lay waiting. My fingers brushed against the paper. The edges had curled slightly from age, but it was all still there, every word I'd meant, every truth I'd never mailed. I took it out, unfolded it carefully, and read it again. The ink had faded in places, but it still felt alive. For the first time, it didn't feel like a confession. It felt like a beginning. I slipped it into a new envelope, one that wasn't worn thin from waiting. I wrote his name on it again, and this time I wrote my son beneath it. Then I sealed it, no hesitation. The mailbox at the end of my street creaked when I opened it. The metal was cold under my hand. I slid the envelope through the slot and listened for the soft thud as it landed inside. It was the smallest sound, but to me it was thunder, a sound big enough to split open 5 years of silence. That night, when I went to bed, I left the window open. The air smelled of rain and possibility. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, and thought about the voice on the phone, the way he'd said Dad. It was cautious, unfamiliar, but real, and that was enough to carry me through the night. For the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming of the past. I dreamed of tomorrow. The night he invited me to dinner, I almost didn't go. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was terrified I'd ruin it. 5 years of sobriety had taught me how to stay upright, how to breathe through the quiet, how to survive being unseen. But no one teaches you how to walk back into a life you broke yourself out of. The invitation came through a short text. Just a few words. Dinner, Friday, 7 p.m., our place. No punctuation, no smiley face. Still, I must have read it 100 times. The words looked too fragile to touch. When Friday came, I stood in front of the mirror for an hour trying to decide which shirt made me look less like a stranger. My hands wouldn't stop sweating. I hadn't seen him, not up close, in more than a decade. And now, after all those years of silence, he wanted me at his table. It felt impossible and holy, both at once. The drive across town was quiet. The streets glowed with the first stretch of evening, streetlights flickering on, windows lit up one by one. I rolled the window down halfway just to steady my breathing. The air smelled of pine and wet asphalt, the faint trace of someone grilling in the distance. It reminded me of summers long gone, laughter, music, a boy with scraped knees chasing fireflies through the yard. Memories that came back too tender to touch. When I pulled up to his house, my headlights caught the white fence and the swing on the porch. It was small, modest, but warm. The kind of home built not from money but from choosing to stay. Through the window I could see movement, shadows crossing the light. A woman's shape near the kitchen, him standing tall, shoulders broader, hair shorter. My heart thudded in my chest like a hand knocking from the inside. I almost turned around. Almost. But then the front door opened. He stood there, framed by the light. Older now, yes, lines near his eyes, a stillness in his posture that looked earned. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then he said simply, "Come in." His voice, calm, measured, carried no anger, but no softness either. It was something in between, something truer. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first: roasted chicken, garlic, herbs, real food, home food, the kind of meal made with time and care. I hadn't realized how much I missed that smell. The kitchen was bright and alive, soft music playing somewhere low, a candle flickering near the window. His wife stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot. When she turned, she smiled, not out of obligation but kindness, the kind of smile that said she knew this night mattered. "Hi," she said. "It's so good to finally meet you." Her tone was warm enough to thaw the air between us. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. She wiped her hands on a towel and gestured toward the table. "Sit anywhere you like." I chose the edge of the table across from him. There was a bowl of salad, steaming vegetables, bread still warm. Simple, perfect. He poured water into my glass. The sound of it filled the silence like a bridge being built, one careful drop at a time. For a while we ate without talking. The clink of forks, the creak of chairs, the hum of the refrigerator, all of it louder than usual, like the house itself was holding its breath. I focused on the food, on not spilling, on keeping my hands steady. But every now and then I caught him glancing at me. Not coldly, just studying, like he was trying to match the man in front of him with the father he used to remember. Finally he spoke. "How's work?" It was such a simple question, but it knocked something loose inside me. No one had asked me that in years, not like they cared about the answer. "It's good," I said. "Still fixing cars. I've got a steady spot now, a good crew." He nodded, chewing slowly, then said, "I remember you teaching me how to change a tire in the driveway. You yelled the whole time. I laughed before I could stop myself. Yeah, I wasn't good at patience back then. He smiled, just barely. No, but you taught me something anyway. The conversation moved gently after that. Not deep, not heavy, but honest. We talked about his job at the school, about his wife's teaching, about the baby on the way. She listened, adding little stories between bites, laughter soft and steady like background music. It felt normal, which was somehow the strangest part of all. At one point she reached for his hand across the table and said, "He's nervous, you know. He cleaned the house twice today." He shot her a look, half embarrassed, half grateful. And for the first time I saw it, the life he'd built, strong and good despite me. And yet here he was, still making room at his table for the man who'd once burned it all down. As dinner ended, he stood and said, "Come with me." We stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, smelling faintly of rain and fresh-cut grass. He leaned on the railing, arms crossed. "I don't know if I'm ready to forget," he said quietly. "But I don't want to keep hating you either." My throat tightened. I nodded. "I don't need you to forget," I said. "Just let me earn a little space in your life again." He looked at me then, really looked, the way people do when they're deciding whether to trust what they see. After a long silence, he said, "Start with dinner, we'll figure out the rest." I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just nodded. He gave a small, careful smile, the kind that doesn't reach all the way to forgiveness but close enough to touch it. Inside, through the window, the candle still flickered on the table. Its light was small but steady, and for the first time in years, I believed it might not go out. It happened a few weeks after that dinner. We'd seen each other a handful of times since, short visits, polite conversations that tiptoed around the past. He'd invite me for coffee on Saturdays, sometimes with his wife, sometimes just the two of us. Always public places, diners, small cafes, somewhere with noise to fill the spaces between what we didn't say. And I understood that. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't a single moment. It's a slow unfreezing, a cautious step forward, then another. That afternoon, the sun was hanging low, one of those late summer days when the light looks softer, more forgiving. He'd asked me to stop by after work. "Nothing big," he said on the phone. "Just dinner, maybe a talk." His voice had carried a weight that made my stomach twist, but I said yes anyway. When I arrived, the air smelled of grilled vegetables and rain from earlier in the day. Through the screen door, I could hear faint music playing, something gentle, an old song from the 90s, the kind of tune that hangs in the air like a memory. Inside, his wife was setting plates on the table. She smiled when she saw me. "He's out back by the shed," said he needed a minute. Her tone was easy, but her eyes gave her away, kind but cautious, like she already knew something was waiting to be said. I found him outside, leaning against the porch railing. The sky had turned the color of copper. He was quiet, staring out at the yard, where the grass moved like slow waves. When he finally looked at me, his face was calm, but his eyes were hard to read. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Always," I replied. We stood there for a while, two men with the same blood but different histories, watching the day dim around us. Then, without turning, he said, "Uncle Ray told me once you almost died." My breath caught. I hadn't known he knew. "He said you overdosed after Mom passed, that they found you in the shop." I swallowed hard, the back of my throat dry. "She wasn't wrong," I said quietly. "I thought about dying more times than I ever thought about living." He turned toward me, face tightening. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question wasn't angry. It was something worse, honest. I met his eyes. "Because I didn't want you to carry that. You already lost your mother. I didn't want you to grow up thinking your father had chosen to leave too." He stared at me, blinking slowly, as if trying to take the words apart. "Then why did you choose everything else?" he asked finally. "The bottles, the fights, walking away from me." I had no defense, just truth. "Because grief doesn't always make you quiet," I said. "Sometimes it makes you cruel, and I was too broken to tell the difference." He looked away, his jaw tightening. The porch light flicked on, washing the space between us in pale gold. Moths fluttered near the bulb, small shadows in constant motion. I felt my chest tighten, not from guilt anymore, but from the need to be understood, even if it came too late. I stepped closer. "When your mom died, I stopped knowing how to be alive. Every day felt like walking through a house full of her voice and not being able to answer it. The bottle was the only thing that made it quiet, until it made everything worse." His breath came out uneven. I could hear the scrape of his shoes on the wood. He was holding himself still, but his eyes were wet. I know that's not an excuse, I added softly. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I needed you to know I didn't stop loving you, I just forgot how to deserve you. The night swallowed the silence that followed. Only the chirp of crickets filled the air, the slow hum of something ancient and patient. He wiped his face quickly like he didn't want me to see. Then he said, I hated you for so long. I told myself I'd never let you back in. And then I saw you at that game, and I didn't know what to feel anymore. He looked down at his hands. You looked alive, and that made me angry because part of me still wanted you to suffer for what you did, but another part, he paused, voice breaking. Another part just wanted to talk to my dad again. I felt something inside me break, not painfully, but in a way that made space where shame had been sitting for years. I reached out, slow, unsure. He didn't move when my hand landed on his shoulder. I'm still here, I said. Different but here, and I'll keep showing up however long it takes. He nodded, then looked at me, eyes red but steady. You already did, he whispered. We stood there under the porch light, the sound of the world settling around us, the soft clatter of dishes from inside, a dog barking down the street, the first hint of cool air brushing past our faces. Nothing dramatic, no music swelling, just two men standing in the wreckage of old pain, finally breathing the same air again. He turned to go back inside. At the doorway he stopped and looked over his shoulder. I want you to be in the baby's life, he said, if you're ready. My throat closed around the answer, but I managed to nod. More than ready, I whispered. Inside, the table was waiting, plates warm, lights low, the smell of rosemary and bread filling the air. I took my seat across from him, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt less like distance and more like grace. It was just after dawn when the phone rang. The light outside was thin, the kind that turns everything silver before the day wakes up. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, the steam drifting like faint smoke into the morning air. When I saw his name on the screen, my first thought was that something was wrong. It always had been before. But when I answered, his voice was shaking for a different reason. She's here, he said, a beat of silence. She's here, Dad, it's a girl. For a moment the world tilted, not in fear this time, but wonder. The coffee cooled in my hand. My heart stumbled somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. He said her name, soft and new. It was a name I'd never heard before, but it sounded like hope when he said it. He told me they were both okay. Then he said the words I'd never expected to hear. Can you come? I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my jacket, the old one with the frayed cuffs, and drove. The sky was pale, the road still damp from last night's rain. Each mile felt like something loosening inside me, a chain giving way, a breath I'd been holding for years finally released. At the hospital, everything smelled of disinfectant and coffee. Machines hummed softly behind closed doors. People whispered down the hall, their voices careful, reverent, like they knew life itself was tiptoeing between rooms. When I reached their door, I stopped. The air felt charged, like the moment before a song begins. I knocked once. He opened the door almost immediately, eyes rimmed red, face glowing with exhaustion and awe. Come in, he said, voice low. And then, smiling faintly, she's perfect. Inside, the world was smaller, just a white room filled with light and the soft rhythm of breathing. His wife was resting, pale but peaceful, a small bundle cradled in her arms. When she saw me, she smiled, tired, genuine. Would you like to meet your granddaughter? I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just nodded. He took the baby carefully from her arms and held her out to me. For a second I froze, my hands trembling, afraid of being unworthy of touching something so new. But he waited, patient, steady, so I reached out. She was impossibly small, her skin warm against my palms, her breath soft and quick. Her eyes were closed, but her tiny mouth moved as if tasting the air. I could feel the flutter of her heartbeat through the blanket, a fragile, insistent rhythm that felt like forgiveness made flesh. I looked down at her and time folded in on itself. Suddenly I was back in another hospital room decades ago, holding a different baby, my son, with the same trembling hands, the same terrified love. But this time there was no fear of failing, just awe, and something close to grace. She's beautiful, I whispered. My voice cracked on the word beautiful. He smiled. Yes, she is. I looked at him then, really looked. The years between us seemed to blur. He wasn't just my son anymore, he was a father. And somehow in that moment I wasn't the man who had lost everything. I was the man who had lived long enough to see life begin again. He reached out and adjusted the blanket around her, fingers brushing mine. It was the smallest touch, but it carried the weight of everything we'd never said. "Her middle name," he said quietly, "we gave her Moms." I felt something break open inside me, a slow, warm flood that left me breathless. I nodded, blinking fast. "She'd like that." We stood there for a while, both of us silent, watching her breathe. The world outside could have disappeared and I wouldn't have noticed. All that mattered was the small rise and fall of her chest, the way the light from the window touched her skin like a blessing. After a while, his wife stirred. "Would you mind holding her for a minute?" she asked softly. "I think she likes your voice." I almost laughed at the absurd kindness of it, this woman offering me a place in her child's first moments like it was the most natural thing in the world. I nodded again, throat tight. "I'll be careful." As I rocked her gently, I hummed without meaning to. A tune I hadn't thought of in years, an old lullaby my wife used to sing in the kitchen while stirring soup, her voice low and sweet. The baby made a small sound, almost like a sigh, and settled deeper against my chest. For the first time I realized how quiet peace could be. Not triumphant, not loud, just steady, the kind of quiet that fills you rather than empties you. When I finally handed her back, my hands lingered on the blanket a moment longer than they needed to. I looked at my son. He met my eyes, and there was no wall left there, only something open, raw, real. "Thank you," I said. He shook his head. "No, thank you." The nurse came in, checking monitors, smiling politely. The spell of the moment broke, but it didn't vanish. It settled into the room like a warm afterglow. Before I left, I touched the edge of the bassinet. "She's going to have a good life," I said softly. He nodded. "I'll make sure of it." As I stepped into the hallway, I turned once more. He was standing by the bed, the baby in his arms, his wife smiling up at him. The light behind them was gold, the color of morning, of new beginnings. And I realized then that redemption doesn't always arrive with applause or a final act. Sometimes it's quieter, a baby's breath, a son's steady hands, and the soft hum of life continuing exactly where it was meant to. The first time I saw my son speak in public, it wasn't at a ceremony or a wedding. It was in the basement of a church, the same kind of room where I'd once sat, trembling, trying to remember how to live again. The folding chairs were still metal, still cold to the touch. The coffee still smelled burnt, and the people still gathered in a loose circle, holding paper cups like anchors. It was his idea to come. He called me one afternoon and said, "They asked if I'd say a few words at the recovery banquet. You should come." His voice carried that calm steadiness I'd learned to trust. He didn't ask. He invited. That difference mattered. So on a quiet Friday evening, I found myself back in a place that smelled of old wood, disinfectant, and memory. I sat near the back, hands folded tight, the hum of the overhead lights mixing with low conversations around the room. People hugged, laughed softly, nodded at familiar faces. I caught snippets of stories: 3 years sober, 10 years clean, 50 days and counting. Different timelines, same hope. When my son walked up to the small podium, the room settled into stillness. He looked comfortable there in a way I never was, shoulders relaxed, sleeves rolled up, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. His wife sat near the front, their daughter in her lap, chewing on the edge of a napkin. Her soft cooing filled the quiet before he began. He adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Most of you know me as Coach Walker," he said. "I don't usually speak at events like this, but tonight I'm not here as a coach, or a husband, or even as a dad." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "I'm here as someone's son." The words hit me before he even looked my way. I felt something shift in the room, like everyone suddenly realized this wasn't just another speech about recovery. This was about the people who stand in the shadows of it. He took a slow breath. "My father's here tonight." He said it simply, no hesitation. Some heads turned toward me. My palms went slick, my throat tight. I forced myself to breathe evenly. He went on. "When I was younger, I thought strength meant pretending not to hurt. I thought it meant shutting doors before anyone could walk out on you." His eyes dropped to the microphone stand for a second, then lifted again. "When my dad fell apart, I told myself I'd never be like him, and for a long time I kept that promise. I worked hard, I stayed clean, I built a life he couldn't ruin, but somewhere along the way I realized I wasn't strong, I was just closed." A murmur rippled softly through the crowd, a shared recognition, the kind that doesn't need words. He smiled faintly. It took me a long time to understand that forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about deciding that pain doesn't get to own you forever. And my dad, he stopped, glanced at me, eyes shining under the fluorescent light. My dad taught me that not by asking, by showing up, again and again, quietly, until one day I realized the man in front of me wasn't the same one who left. The sound that came from the room wasn't applause, not yet. It was softer. A low hum of emotion that passed from person to person like an exhale everyone had been holding. He continued, I didn't grow up with bedtime stories about heroes, but now I tell them to my daughter, and when I do, I tell her that heroes aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who crawl out of the dark and keep walking, no matter how far they have to go. He looked down for a moment, steadying himself, then smiled toward the front row. And I tell her one of those heroes is her grandfather. My breath caught. For a second, I thought my knees might give out. All the noise in the room faded, the buzz of lights, the creak of chairs, the hum of the old radiator. All I could hear was the soft sound of his voice, carrying words I never believed I'd live long enough to hear. He looked back at the crowd. I don't know what forgiveness looks like for everyone, but I know what it feels like for me. It feels like dinner around a small table. It feels like laughter coming back after years of quiet. It feels like peace that doesn't erase the past but lets you breathe in spite of it. Then he nodded once as if to close the thought. So tonight I just want to say, if you're fighting, keep fighting. If you're trying to get back to the people you love, don't stop showing up. You never know when someone's ready to meet you halfway. The room broke into applause, not loud or rushed, just deep, heartfelt, honest. He stepped down, shaking a few hands, smiling shyly. Then his daughter squealed, arms reaching out for him, and he lifted her up, laughing. That sound, that laugh, filled every hollow space inside me. When it was over, people came by to talk, to congratulate him, to nod at me in quiet understanding. He walked over, still holding his little girl, her tiny hand gripping the edge of his shirt. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, voice caught somewhere between pride and tears. "You did good," I said softly. He smiled. "We both did." He handed me his daughter. She was bigger now, heavier, eyes bright and alert. She reached for my beard, giggling. And in that simple, perfect moment, standing in that worn-out church basement, light flickering overhead, the smell of coffee and paper and redemption in the air, I realized that every word he said wasn't just his story. It was ours. It started with a question. Not from my son, not from his wife, but from a man at the back of the meeting hall one night. He stood up after my son's speech, hands trembling, voice barely steady. He said, "How do you know when you've made it? When you've finally forgiven yourself?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to my son, but he didn't answer right away. He looked at me. Then he said, "You don't make it, you just start helping someone else try." That's how it began, not with a plan, not with a mission statement, just a simple truth said out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear it. And somehow that truth grew legs. A few weeks later, he called me. "Dad," he said, "the center downtown is opening a mentorship program for recovering addicts. They need people who have been through it, who can speak from the inside out." He paused. "I think you'd be good at it." For a long time I said no, not because I didn't want to help, but because I didn't think I had the right to. What could I possibly tell anyone about redemption that didn't sound like a man trying to rewrite his own sins? But he kept calling, kept asking. And one day, I ran out of excuses. The first meeting was small, 6 folding chairs in a drafty community room that smelled faintly of mop water and coffee grounds. A whiteboard leaned crooked against the wall, marker stains ghosting the surface from lessons long forgotten. I stood there, palms slick, heartbeat loud in my ears, staring at 5 faces that mirrored every version of myself I used to be, the denial, the fear, the hunger for one more chance. So I told them the truth, not the polished kind, not the kind you share when you want to sound healed, the kind that hurts to say. I told them about the nights I begged for oblivion, the mornings I woke up ashamed to still be breathing, about the first time I heard my son say "Dad" again, and how it broke me open in all the right ways. I didn't talk about recovery like a triumph. I talked about it like a trade, one day of honesty for one more day of life. When I finished, no one clapped. They just nodded. One man wiped his eyes. A woman whispered, "Thank you." And that was enough. After that it became routine. Tuesday nights, 7 o'clock. We called it the circle. Not official, not registered, but word spread. The room got fuller. Sometimes 20 people, sometimes just 3, some stayed sober, some didn't, but every week we kept showing up. My son joined once in a while. He'd sit quietly at the edge, listening. When the talk got heavy, he'd catch my eye and give me that same look he had when he was a kid, the one that said, "I'm right here." It grounded me every time. There was one night late spring when I came early to set up the chairs. The sun was still up, pouring gold through the dusty windows. The air smelled like cut grass drifting in through the open door. I heard laughter outside, 2 young guys from the group walking in, joking about baseball, one holding a cup of gas station coffee. That sound, light, careless, filled the space before I even turned around. And I thought, this is it. This is what healing sounds like. Over time, the circle began to change shape. People started bringing others, brothers, daughters, co-workers. One woman brought her mother. A man brought his teenage son, quiet and angry, sitting with crossed arms in the back. I watched that boy week after week, never speaking, until one night he stayed behind after everyone left. He came up to me, eyes down. "My dad said you used to be like him," he muttered. "Worse," I said. He looked up, surprised. "And you're still here?" I smiled. Somehow, he nodded, thinking hard, then said, "Maybe I'll come back next week." And he did. That night as I locked up, I realized something I'd never said out loud. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's a circle. You give it and it comes back. You fall and someone reaches out. Then one day, it's your hand pulling someone else up. My granddaughter came to visit one evening near the end of summer. She was walking now, small and wobbly, her laugh bright enough to light the whole house. She toddled across the floor toward me, holding a crumpled piece of paper, one of her drawings, wild scribbles of color. She pressed it into my hand, smiling wide, and said the only word she seemed to love more than any other. "Pop." The sound hit me right in the chest, not like an echo of something old, but the beginning of something new. A name I hadn't earned from history, but from presence, from staying. That night after she went to sleep, I sat on the porch again. The air was cool, stars faint through the city haze. My son joined me, 2 mugs of tea in hand. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of crickets, the distant traffic. He said, "You know, they talk about recovery like it's climbing out of a hole." I looked at him. "Yeah," he nodded. "But I think it's more like what you're doing now, turning back and helping someone else up." He smiled faintly. "That's what Mom would have wanted." The night deepened around us, soft and still. Through the window, I could see the faint glow of the nightlight in my granddaughter's room, her tiny form curled under a blanket covered in stars. The circle, I thought. Not broken, just continuing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was trying to make peace with my past anymore. I was living proof that peace had finally found me. It was Thanksgiving when it all came together, the whole family under one roof for the first time in longer than I could remember. The smell hit me before I even stepped inside. Roasted turkey, cinnamon, something sweet baking in the oven. That smell, warm, familiar, chaotic, was the kind of welcome I used to dream about when I was sleeping in the front seat of my truck years ago. Now it was real. My son opened the door, his daughter clinging to his leg. She saw me and squealed, "Pop." Before I could even say hello, she ran straight into my arms, nearly knocking me off balance, her tiny fingers sticky with pie crust. Her laugh, sharp, wild, unfiltered, filled the space like sunlight through a dusty window. Inside, the table was covered with mismatched plates and dishes piled high, stuffing spilling over the edges, gravy bubbling, bread slightly burned at the corners. My son's wife moved through the kitchen with the calm of someone who had learned to embrace the beautiful mess of it all. "Don't judge the potatoes," she said, smiling. "They're lumpy, but they taste right." I chuckled. Sounds like life. We sat down together, him at the head of the table, his wife to his right, their daughter between us. Her small hand rested on mine, sticky and warm, as if to anchor me in the moment. For a second, I forgot to breathe. I'd spent so many years imagining what this might feel like, and the reality was quieter, smaller, but infinitely more sacred. When grace was said, his voice caught on the word thankful. It wasn't dramatic. Just a slight pause, enough to remind me that gratitude, like forgiveness, doesn't come easy. It's something you learn to speak slowly, word by word. We ate, we laughed, we spilled things. Halfway through the meal, his daughter dropped her spoon into the mashed potatoes and gasped like it was the end of the world. He laughed and said, "That's okay, sweetheart. Pop's done worse." Then he winked at me. And just like that, the old guilt that used to sit in my chest like a stone felt lighter, not gone, but softened by love that no longer needed to be perfect to be real. After dinner, we gathered in the living room. The fireplace was lit, the crackle of wood filling the pauses between conversation. My granddaughter sat on the rug with her crayons, drawing something that looked like a tangle of rainbows. Every few minutes she'd hold one up and ask, "Do you like it, Pop?" And every time I'd say, "I love it." Even when all I could see were circles and chaos, I meant it, because that's what love is, saying I love it even when you don't fully understand it. My son sat down next to me on the couch. The light from the fire flickered across his face, older now, yes, but peaceful in a way I never was at his age. He took a sip of coffee, then said, "You know, when I was younger, I used to think family was supposed to be clean. Perfect. No cracks, no fights, no history." He shook his head and smiled. "Now I think maybe family's just about showing up anyway, even when you're still figuring it out." I looked at him for a long time before I answered. "I used to think love was something you earned," I said, "that you had to get everything right first before you were allowed to have it." I gestured toward his daughter, who was now proudly taping her drawing to the wall. "But then she came along, and you took me back, and I realized love isn't earned at all. It's given, sometimes despite everything that should have made it impossible." He didn't say anything, but his eyes softened. He leaned back, exhaling, and for the first time I saw how far we'd both come, not just in years, but in the way we'd learned to hold each other's flaws without flinching. The baby, no, not a baby anymore, came over then, climbed into my lap and handed me a crayon. "Draw with me, Pop." Her voice was small but certain, like she already knew that asking was enough to make it so. I drew a crooked sun, lopsided and too bright, and she squealed with delight. "It's perfect," she said, and I laughed, really laughed, because she meant it, and because I realized that maybe perfection was never the point at all. Later, when everyone was cleaning up, I slipped outside for some air. The sky was dark now, the smell of pine and wood smoke hanging in the cold. I could hear them through the open window, laughter, the clatter of dishes, the easy rhythm of a home that had learned how to hold both joy and memory without breaking. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to rebuild what I'd destroyed, and how I'd come to understand something no one ever told me, that redemption doesn't mean undoing the past. It means learning to live honestly with the scars it left. It means being part of a family that knows exactly who you are, and still sets a place for you at the table. My son joined me a few minutes later, hands in his pockets. We stood there in the chill, side by side. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard where tiny footprints from his daughter's shoes dotted the mud like constellations. "She's lucky," I said quietly. He smiled. "We both are." Inside, I could see his wife wrapping leftovers, humming softly. The house glowed from within, imperfect, noisy, alive. And I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this, the laughter, the spilled gravy, the second chances, was what love really looked like. Not perfect, but whole. And for a man who once thought he'd lost everything, that was more than enough. It was a late afternoon in early winter, the kind of day when the sky can't decide whether to hold the light or let it go. The air was cold enough to sting, but calm. The world felt quiet. My son had invited me over for dinner again, just a small one, he said, but I knew what it was really about. It had been a year since his daughter was born, one full circle of seasons since the day I'd held her for the first time. He wanted to celebrate. And somehow, I knew this night was going to be more than that. It would be the moment where everything we'd fought to rebuild finally came full circle. When I arrived, the house glowed with a soft warmth, the kind that comes not from candles or lamps, but from people who love each other being in the same space. The smell of stew filled the air. Music hummed faintly in the background, a song I didn't recognize, but one that felt familiar, like it had been waiting for this moment too. My granddaughter ran toward me, tiny feet thudding against the floor, her curls bouncing with every step. She shouted, "Pop's here," as if she were announcing something sacred. I knelt down and she threw herself into my arms, her laughter bright enough to cut through anything left of the dark years behind me. I looked up. My son stood by the table watching us. He didn't say anything, just smiled, the kind of quiet smile that means more than words ever could. We ate, we laughed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like part of something that had healed enough to start growing again. After dinner, when his wife took their daughter to bed, my son and I stayed behind in the living room. The fireplace flickered, painting the room in gold and amber. He sat across from me, both hands wrapped around his mug of coffee. For a while, we didn't talk. We didn't need to. It was enough just to be there. Two lives that had once fallen apart, now sitting side by side in the quiet. Then he spoke. "Dad," he said softly, "I've been thinking about that night, the one when I left." The words landed gently, but they carried the weight of everything we'd never fully said. I nodded. "I think about it too," I admitted. "Every day for a long time." He looked down, thumb tracing the rim of his cup. "I used to tell myself I'd never forgive you, that you didn't deserve it. And I believed that for years. But then," hesitated, searching for something inside himself. "Then I became a father, and I realized how easy it is to fail the people you love when you're scared." He glanced up, eyes glistening. "I used to think you were weak, but now I think you were just lost." I couldn't speak. Every word I'd carried, every apology I'd rehearsed suddenly felt small. So I just listened, heart open, letting his voice fill the spaces where regret used to live. He leaned back, sighing. "I don't forgive what happened," he said slowly. "But I forgive you, the man you were, the one who didn't know how to stay." Then he smiled, faint but real. "And I'm proud of the man you became." The sound that left my chest wasn't quite a sob, more like a release. Something uncoiled deep inside me, something I hadn't even known was still tied in knots. Tears blurred the room until all I could see was the faint glow of the fire and the outline of my son, my boy, offering me the one thing I'd stopped believing I could ever have: forgiveness. I stood up slowly, walked over, and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. He looked up, eyes steady. "Thank you for coming back," he said. And in that moment I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's a surrender, not of pride but of pain. It's choosing to stop keeping score and start keeping company. We sat there for a while longer, talking about nothing and everything, about work, about his daughter, about how the world keeps turning even when you think it's done with you. Outside, snow had started to fall, slow, deliberate, quiet. The flakes drifted past the window, catching the firelight as they went, each one different. Each one a reminder that imperfection can still be beautiful. When I left that night, he walked me to the door. The air outside was sharp, filled with the clean smell of snow and pine. He hugged me, not a cautious hug, not the kind that ends too soon, but the kind that says you're home. And I knew then that the circle was complete, not perfect, but whole. Years have passed since that night. The little girl, my granddaughter, is in school now. She calls me to show me her drawings, her messy handwriting, her missing teeth. And sometimes, when I see my son watching her with that same soft awe I used to have, I realize that maybe forgiveness isn't something we give once. It's something we live over and over. Every day we choose to stay kind. Every day we choose to show up. The truth is, I'll never be the father I should have been, but I've learned to be the grandfather I was meant to be. And maybe that's what redemption really is, not undoing the past, but using it to light someone else's path forward. I've met a lot of people in my life who carry ghosts. Some wear them quietly, some let them speak for them. But I've learned this: no matter how far gone you think you are, no matter how badly you've broken something, there's always a chance to turn around. Not because time heals everything, it doesn't, but because love gives you the courage to try again. And if you're listening right now, maybe this story isn't really about me and my son. Maybe it's about you. Maybe there's someone you haven't called in years, someone who hurt you, or someone you hurt, someone who's still waiting, even if neither of you knows it. Would you forgive yours? Not because they earned it, not because they asked, but because you're ready to be free. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, it rewrites the future. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think of your father, your mother, your child, or anyone you once loved and lost, don't wait for the perfect moment to make things right. There's no such thing. There's only now. Pick up the phone, write the letter, show up, even if your voice shakes, even if they don't answer. Because sometimes the act of reaching out is the first step toward becoming whole again. And if you've ever felt like you've failed beyond repair, remember this: you can still become the person your younger self needed. You can still be the reason someone else believes in second chances. Thank you truly for listening, for staying with this story until the end. If it meant something to you, I hope you carry it with you into your own life. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it, let it travel. Let it remind someone that redemption is never too late. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep telling stories that heal, stories that make you feel less alone, stories that remind us that even the broken pieces still belong. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. And tonight, when you look at the people you love, don't look for perfection. Look for presence, because that's where love lives. I'm grateful for you being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And may your home always be warm, your heart always be open, and your family, no matter how imperfect, always be yours. Good night, my friends. Take care. And remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing a human heart can do.